Be warned, the story you are about to hear is a journey into a place consumed by sorrow. To fully understand the nature of the gloom, you must witness the tale from its misty beginning to its bitter end. I invite you to subscribe, settle in for the full experience, and discover what lies waiting in the weeping village of Kystenvik. The Gloom of Kystenvik, Part 1. The Weeping Village. My journey to Kystenvik began with a footnote in a forgotten academic journal. I am, or was, Dr. Alistair Finch, a man whose passion for architectural linguistics had led me down paths of ever-increasing obscurity. My field is the study of how buildings communicate, not through design, but through their very substance, the language of decay, the syntax of stress, the poetry of ruin. Most of my colleagues considered it a dead end, a romantic but fruitless pursuit. My grant money was drying up and my tenure prospects were dim. Kystenvik was my last desperate gamble. The footnote described a remote fishing village on the northernmost coast of Norway, accessible only by a thrice-weekly ferry or a treacherous winding road that was often impassable in winter. It spoke of a unique architectural phenomenon known as sorgarkitektur, sorrow architecture. The author, a long-dead ethnographer, wrote, "The very timber of Kystenvik weeps. The houses, built from ancient salt-bleached wood, seem to sag under an invisible weight, their lines distorted as if by a perpetual grief. Moisture beads on interior walls even on the driest days, and the locals, a stoic and insular people, speak of the gloom as one might speak of a season." It was this phrase, the gloom, that snagged in my mind. It was not capitalized as a proper noun, yet its context implied a presence, an entity. Intrigued, I booked my passage. The ferry ride was a fitting overture. A thick, pearlescent fog clung to the water, swallowing the world until only our vessel and the churning grey sea existed. The air grew colder, heavy with the smell of salt and something else, something ancient and vegetal, like a forest floor that had never seen the sun. Other passengers, mostly locals returning with supplies, were silent. They stared into the mist, not with boredom, but with a kind of weary vigilance. Kystenvik emerged from the fog not as a sight, but as a sound, the mournful toll of a single bell buoy, its clapper striking metal with a dead, final clang. Then the outlines of the village appeared. It was nestled in a narrow cove, flanked by colossal jagged cliffs that looked like broken teeth. The houses, just as the journal had described, were hunched against the shoreline, their roofs steep and dark. They were not merely old, they looked exhausted. Stepping onto the slick stone pier, the silence was the first thing I truly noticed. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a rural hamlet. It was a weighted, oppressive silence, as if sound itself had difficulty propagating in the damp air. The cries of the gulls seemed distant and distorted. My own footsteps echoed unnaturally. My lodging was the village's only inn, the Villen Anchor, the resting anchor. The innkeeper, a man named Thomas, had a face like a sea cliff, all crags and deep-set shadows. He barely looked at me as he slid a heavy iron key across the counter. "Room 4, he grunted. "Don't open the window after dusk. The air gets heavy." The room was sparse and clean, but the phenomenon was immediately apparent. The dark wooden walls, despite being dry to the touch, had a sheen of moisture like a feverish brow. A single crooked painting of a shipwreck hung above the bed. The air was chilled to the bone, and a faint, almost subliminal hum vibrated through the floorboards. I spent the next few days exploring, my camera and notebook my only companions. The villagers were polite but distant. They answered my questions with single words, their eyes constantly drifting towards the sea or the sky as if expecting something. The sorrow architecture was even more pronounced up close. The door frames were slightly warped. The floorboards of the ancient church sighed under my weight. It was as though the entire village was slowly, inexorably sinking into a state of structural despair. I tried to document the weeping walls, but the moisture defied logic. There were no pipes, no leaks. It was condensation without a source, tears from an invisible eye. The locals offered no explanation. When I asked about the gloom, they would fall silent, shake their heads and walk away. Only the village elder, a woman named Elara, gave me anything at all. I found her mending nets by the shore, her fingers as gnarled as driftwood, her eyes were the color of the sea, faded and full of a profound depth. "You are the man who studies our houses," she said, not a question but a statement. "I am. I'm trying to understand why they behave this way." She stopped her work and looked out at the fog-shrouded horizon. "You study the vessel, but you do not ask about the sea it floats upon. Our houses are sad because Kystenvik is a sad place. It has been for a very long time. Because of the gloom," I ventured, my voice low. Her gaze snapped back to me, sharp and sudden. "Some words are anchors. They hold things here that should be allowed to drift away. Be careful what you name, Doctor. Naming is a form of invitation." She would say no more. That night, I had my first true encounter. I was working late in my room, poring over sketches of a particularly sorrowful-looking lintel. The hum I'd noticed earlier grew slightly in volume. It was a low, resonant frequency that I could feel in my teeth. Then, I heard a sound from outside my door, a soft, wet scraping. I froze. It was past midnight. The inn was silent. The scraping came again, slow and deliberate, the sound of something heavy and damp being dragged along the wooden floor of the hallway. I held my breath, listening. The sound stopped directly outside my door. An eternity of silence passed. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought of the innkeeper's warning. Don't open the window after dusk. He hadn't said anything about the door. Slowly, I rose and crept to the door. I put my eye to the keyhole. At first, I saw nothing but the dim, murky hallway. Then, a shape coalesced out of the shadows. It was vague, indistinct, a smudge of deeper darkness in the gloom. It had a roughly humanoid form, but it seemed to lack substance, its edges blurring into the air. It was utterly featureless, a silhouette cut from the fabric of night itself. As I watched, a single glistening drop of black liquid fell from the shape onto the floorboards, landing with a soft pat. The shape remained motionless for another moment, as if listening, before it seemed to dissolve, melting back into the oppressive shadows from whence it came. I stumbled back from the door, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't sleep. I sat in a chair, facing the door, until the weak grey light of dawn filtered through the grime on the window pane. In the morning, I forced myself to open the door. On the wooden floor, exactly where I had seen the drop fall, was a dark, wet stain. It looked like oil, but it smelled of seawater and deep, ancient rot. And embedded in the centre of the stain was a single perfect grey gull feather. Part 2, the sunken cathedral. The incident in the hallway changed my academic curiosity into something colder, more personal. Fear. The gloom was not a metaphor. The stain outside my door was tangible proof. It was a presence, and it was aware of me. My research took on a new urgency. I avoided the villagers and focused on the village's oldest structure, the St. Olaf's Maritime Chapel, a stone building perched on the very edge of the cliffs. Abandoned for over a century. The locals called it the sunken cathedral, though it had never sunk beneath the waves. Elara had told me it was named so because it holds what the sea took. The chapel was a study in dereliction. The salt-laced winds had eroded the stone, and the roof had partially collapsed, leaving the interior open to the elements. Yet, it was here the sorrow architecture was most potent. The remaining walls wept constantly, the moisture tracing paths through layers of grime and lichen like tear stains on a weathered face. The air inside was unnaturally cold, and a profound silence reigned, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water that seemed to fall from nowhere. In a small, locked vestry at the back, I found what I was looking for. A collection of old parish records, their leather bindings swollen and warped by the damp. Most were unreadable. The ink bled into meaningless blotches, but one volume, a ship's log bound in sealskin, was remarkably preserved. Its title was embossed in faded gold, Sorgen's Dronning, the Queen of Sorrow, dated 1742. The captain's hand was elegant, the entries precise. The Sorgen's Dronning was a Danish vessel on a special charter, sailing from Copenhagen to Iceland. The cargo was listed simply as ecclesiastical artifacts for the Bishop of Reykjavik. But as the voyage progressed, the captain's entries grew erratic. October 12th. A strange fog has dogged us since we left port. Not of the sea, it clings to the ship, cold and silent. The crew is unnerved. They say the air feels thin. Sounds do not carry. October 16th. The crew whispers of the cargo. The crate in the main hold. They say they hear things from it at night. A low hum. I have doubled the watch, but the men are afraid. Last night, Jensen swore he saw a man with no face standing by the mainmast, only to vanish when challenged. October 20th. The fog is absolute. We have not seen the sun in a week. Navigation is impossible. The ship itself seems to groan under a great sadness. The wood weeps. I saw it with my own eyes, water like tears beading on the mast. October 22nd. Hell is upon us. The thing in the hold is loose. I do not know what it is. A shadow, a cold that eats light and sound. It touched Lars. He did not scream, he simply stopped. He stands by the rail, staring, his face empty. The color has gone from his eyes. When we speak to him, he does not hear. He is a shell. The final entry was a barely legible scrawl, the ink smudged as if by trembling hands. It is free. The ship is lost. The fog is its body. It feeds on sorrow and leaves behind only echoes. We are off the coast of a small village. I can hear a bell. I will sink her. I will sink the queen and her cursed heart. Let the sea hold what man cannot. Let the bell toll for us. God have mercy on this place. I sat back on the cold stone floor, the logbook heavy in my lap. The hum in my ears was louder now. The weeping of the walls seemed to synchronize with the beating of my own heart. The gloom was not from Kystenvik. It was a passenger, a contagion brought here and deliberately sunk just offshore. The Sorgen's Dronning was its tomb, and the village of Kystenvik its eternal warden. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the doorway. I looked up to see Thomas the innkeeper. His face, usually a mask of stoicism, was tight with alarm. "Alara sent me," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She said you were stirring the depths. You should not be here. The sunken cathedral is the quietest place in the village. It is where it listens most closely. Thomas, I know what the gloom is." I found the logbook of the Sorgen's Dronning. A look of genuine fear passed over his features. He stepped inside, pulling the heavy oak door shut. The sound was a deafening boom in the small space. "Then you know that we are not merely haunted," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "We are guardians of a prison with walls of water and a lock made of forgetting. For generations, we have kept the story from outsiders. We have offered the gloom our silence, our quiet acceptance, hoping it would sleep. "What is it?" I asked. "What was in the crate?" "We do not know the name. The old texts call it the Yurtasorg, the heart of sorrow. Not a physical heart, but an artifact. A concentration of pure despair, taken from a place of immense suffering. A relic of a forgotten war, a fallen kingdom. It was being transported to be buried in the volcanic ice of Iceland, where it was hoped its power would be neutralized forever. It never made it." He gestured to the weeping walls around us. "The gloom is the influence of the Yurtasorg, radiating from the wreck. It is a sentient despair. It feeds on strong emotions. Joy, anger, love. But sorrow is its native tongue. It draws them out, consumes them, and leaves behind an echo. An echo." I thought of the featureless shape in the hallway. "The things you might see in the fog," Thomas said, his eyes dark. "The hollows. They are not ghosts of the dead. They are the echoes of what the gloom has consumed. Stolen moments, stolen memories, stolen souls, all tangled together into shapes that mimic the living. They are drawn to those with strong spirits, strong emotions, like a moth to a flame." He looked at me pointedly. "You came here full of desperation and academic ambition. To the gloom, you are a feast." A single, loud crack echoed from outside. We both jumped. It was the sound of splitting timber. Another followed, then another. It sounded like the village was breaking apart. We rushed outside. The fog had rolled in from the sea, thicker than I had ever seen it. It wasn't white or grey, but a sickly bruised purple-black. And within it, the sounds of Kystenvik were changing. The familiar groans of the old houses were intensifying, punctuated by the sharp reports of snapping beams and the grinding of wood under immense pressure. The sorrow architecture was in revolt. The village was screaming. Through the thick, swirling miasma, I could see figures moving. The hollows, dozens of them. They were no longer shy and distinct shapes, they were solidifying, taking on clearer forms, some like sailors in archaic dress, others like villagers from a bygone era, but all of them were faceless. Their features a swirling vortex of shadow. They moved through the streets, not attacking but simply passing through the walls of the houses. And with every house they entered, the sounds of structural agony intensified. "It is awake." Thomas breathed, his face pale as bone. "You didn't just stir the depths, Doctor. You have rung the dinner bell." Part 3. The Ritual of the Silent Bell. Panic was a physical thing, a cold knot in my stomach, but the villagers of Kystenvik did not panic. As the unnatural twilight of the gloom descended and the symphony of their home's destruction swelled, they emerged from their houses not in fear, but with a grim, chilling resolve. They moved with the purpose of people, enacting a long-rehearsed, dreaded play. Thomas grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "Stay with me, you are part of this now." He led me towards the center of the village, a small, cobbled square where a single massive ship's anchor stood, rusted and immense. The villagers were gathering, carrying old lanterns that cast a weak, flickering light against the encroaching darkness. Elara was there, her face a mask of grim determination. She held a heavy iron bell, its surface free of rust, polished to a dark sheen. It had no clapper. "The gloom is too strong," she said, her voice cutting through the din. "It has been roused from its slumber. The old ways will not be enough." Her ancient eyes found me. The outsider has read the book. He knows the origin. His knowledge gives the story weight again, and the gloom feeds on that weight. "What's happening?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What are the hollows doing to the houses?" "They are not breaking them," Thomas explained, his voice low and urgent. "They are tuning them. The sorrow architecture is not just a symptom, it's an instrument. The gloom is preparing the village to resonate with its own frequency of despair. If it succeeds, it will create a feedback loop. The village's sorrow will amplify the gloom, which will in turn amplify the sorrow until everything here, wood, stone, and flesh, dissolves into it. Kystenvik will become a permanent, gaping wound in the world." My blood ran cold. I was not just an observer. I was the catalyst for an apocalypse in miniature. Elara raised the silent bell. For generations we have performed the ritual of the silent bell. We remind the gloom of its first moments here, the sound that marked its watery grave. It is a ritual of appeasement, a lullaby of iron to soothe the beast. "How can you ring a bell with no clapper?" bewildered I asked, bewildered. "We do not use metal," she said, her gaze unwavering. "We strike it with something the gloom cannot consume, something it fears, a memory, a pure, untainted memory, offered willingly." The villagers formed a circle around the anchor. One by one, they would step forward, place a hand on the cold iron of the bell, and close their eyes. A flicker of emotion would cross their face. A brief, genuine smile, a flash of warmth. It was a memory of a child's first laugh, a lover's touch, a perfect summer's day. They would offer this purest, happiest moment of their lives. When they did, the bell would issue a single, resonant chime, a sound that was not quite sound, more a psychic vibration that pulsed outwards. With each chime, the encroaching gloom would momentarily recoil. The groaning of the houses would lessen, the hollows would flicker and grow indistinct. But the cost was etched on the villagers' faces. As they stepped back from the bell, their expressions were subtly flatter, their eyes a little duller. They were giving away the brightest parts of their own souls to buy another year of quiet misery. They were feeding the lock on their own prison. This time, it wasn't working. For every 2 villagers who struck the bell, creating the beautiful, heart-wrenching chime, another would step forward and fail. They would place their hand on the bell, and nothing would happen. A look of confusion, then horror, would dawn on their faces. "It's too strong," Thomas muttered, his face ashen. "The gloom is already inside them. It's finding their happy memories and tainting them, consuming them before they can be offered. We are running out of fuel." The grinding of the village grew louder. The hollows were pressing closer, their featureless faces turned towards the dwindling light of the lanterns. The air grew thick, making it hard to breathe. I could feel a profound, bottomless despair seeping into my own mind, a sense of utter hopelessness. It whispered that my life was a failure, my research a joke, my presence here a final, pathetic mistake. Elara's gaze fell upon me again. It held no malice, only a desperate, terrible calculation. "The outsider," ringing with authority, she said, her voice ringing with authority. "His memories are fresh. The gloom has not had time to curdle them. He is our only chance." Every eye in the square turned to me. They were not asking. Thomas pushed me forward. "Dr. Finch, Alistair, your life has been one of books and quiet places, of passion for your work. You must have one memory, one perfect moment of discovery, of intellectual beauty, untainted by the world, a moment of pure truth. That is what we need, something the gloom in all its ancient sorrow cannot understand." I stood before the silent bell, the cold iron radiating a palpable sense of dread. My mind raced. What could I offer? My life felt like a string of disappointments, the joy of my doctorate, tainted by the subsequent years of struggle, the pride of my first publication, soured by its academic insignificance. The gloom was already whispering in my ear, turning every memory I grasped into ash. "Failure, obscurity, you are nothing." I closed my eyes, trying to block it out. I had to find something, one thing. And then I remembered. It wasn't a grand achievement. It was a small, quiet moment years ago. I was in the Bodleian Library at Oxford, a young, wide-eyed student. I had been granted access to a medieval manuscript, a treatise on the acoustics of cathedrals. The air smelled of old paper and beeswax. The silence was absolute, reverent. As I turned a delicate, illuminated page, a single beam of sunlight lanced through a high Gothic window, striking the page. For a fleeting second, the gold leaf of an initial D blazed with a light so pure, so divine, It seemed to set the entire room alight. In that instant, I felt a connection across centuries, a perfect crystalline moment of understanding and beauty. It was the moment I knew, with absolute certainty, what I wanted to dedicate my life to. It was pure, intellectual joy. I clutched that memory like a drowning man clutching a spar. The gloom clawed at it, trying to tell me it was meaningless, a trick of the light, the delusion of a foolish young man. "No," I whispered. I stepped forward and placed my hand firmly on the cold, silent bell. I poured the memory into it, the smell of the library, the weight of the silence, the impossible, brilliant blaze of that single beam of light. The bell rang. It was not the psychic chime the villagers had produced. It was a deep, resonant, and ear-splittingly loud bong, a true physical sound of impossible power. The sound wave exploded outwards, a visible ripple in the thick, dark fog. The ground shook. The lanterns flickered and died, plunging us into absolute blackness. But the sound didn't stop. It was a pure, cleansing tone that drove the despair from my mind. The groaning of the houses ceased. The hollows shrieked, a thin, tearing sound like ripping fabric, and dissolved into wisps of nothing. The oppressive weight in the air vanished. When the sound finally faded, a new silence fell, a natural one, and for the first time since I'd arrived in Kystenvik, I could hear the gentle, rhythmic wash of the waves on the shore. I opened my eyes. The fog was gone. Not just thinned, but utterly scoured from the cove. High above, a smattering of stars shone in a clear black sky. The villagers were staring at me, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. Ilara looked at the bell, then at me. "What have you done?" she breathed. The bell, once smooth and dark, was now covered in a network of fine hairline cracks. As we watched, a single large fissure raced up its side, and with a final mournful groan, the great iron bell split in two, falling to the cobbles with a dead, final thud. The ritual was not just completed, it was broken forever. Part 4. The Heart in the Deep. The breaking of the bell plunged Kystenvik into a new kind of dread. The immediate threat of the gloom had been blasted away by the force of my memory, but we all understood the truth. It was a temporary reprieve. The instrument of their appeasement was destroyed. The lullaby was over. When the gloom returned, there would be nothing to hold it back. A grim council was held in the inn's common room. The air was thick with the smell of wet wool and fear. "The bell is broken," Thomas stated, his voice flat. "The ritual is lost to us." "It was failing anyway," Ilara countered, her voice frail but firm. "The gloom has grown too strong. It has been feeding on our quiet sorrow for too long. Appeasement is no longer an option." She turned her gaze to me. The outsider's memory did not soothe the beast. It challenged it. It struck it with a concept it could not absorb. Pure, intellectual beauty without a trace of loss. It was like shouting a line of poetry into the face of a deaf, screaming man. It caused not peace but confusion, pain. "So what do we do when it comes back?" a fisherman asked, his voice cracking. "It will be angry." "We do not wait for it to come back," I said, surprising myself with my own conviction. My academic detachment was gone, burned away by the events of the night. We have to go to the source, the Hjertesorg, the heart of sorrow. A wave of murmurs and fearful glances filled the room. "Go to the wreck?" Thomas scoffed. "That is suicide. No one has seen the Sorgen's droning since the day it sank. It's in the deepest part of the cove, and the gloom is thickest there. It is the heart of the storm. The captain of the Sorgen's droning sank his ship to imprison the artifact," I argued, my mind racing, connecting the pieces. "He created a prison of water and pressure, but the prison is failing. The gloom is its influence leaking out. We can't keep patching the walls from the outside. We have to reinforce the cell from within. And how do you propose we do that? Ilara asked, her eyes searching mine.
Logbook, I said, the idea forming as I spoke. The captain wrote, "Let the bell toll for us." He heard the bellboy from the village as he went down. That sound, the sound of the bell, was the last thing the ship heard. It's part of the legend, part of the curse. That's why your ritual worked for so long. You were echoing the sound of its own burial. I looked at the faces around the room. My memory was strong enough to break your bell. What if we could take that same force, that same concept of untainted creation, and apply it directly to the wreck? Not to destroy the Yetzorg, that's probably impossible, but to seal it, to reinforce the captain's final act, to turn its tomb into a true fortress. It was a mad plan, born of desperation, but it was the only plan we had. For the next 24 hours, the village of Kystenvik prepared not for a ritual of defense, but for an expedition. The fishermen brought out their sturdiest boat, the Sturdig, its engine coughing to life with a reassuring roar. They gathered powerful lamps, ropes, and a small experimental diving bell that had been used for salvaging years ago. My role was stranger. Ilara and Thomas sat with me, forcing me to dredge up every positive, creative, or beautiful memory I possessed, every moment of intellectual discovery, every line of perfect poetry, every stunning piece of architecture I had ever loved. They made me write them down, sketch them, speak them aloud, strengthening them against the insidious whispers of the gloom, which I could already feel starting to creep back at the edges of my perception. I was to be the weapon. My mind was the payload. As dusk fell, we set out. The sea was unnaturally calm, the water black as ink. The stars were gone, hidden by a low-hanging blanket of cloud. A faint, familiar hum was back in the air. The gloom was returning. We followed the sound of the bellboy, its lonely clang guiding us to the place where the Sorgen's droning had met her end. As we drew closer, the water began to change. Patches of it swirled with a faint, sickly phosphorescence. The air grew frigid. The engine of the Sturdig sputtered as if the fuel lines were freezing. And then we saw it. The wreck was not entirely submerged. During a supernaturally low tide caused by the gloom's immense presence, the ship's broken masts clawed at the surface, draped in seaweed and centuries of decay. The water around the wreck did not move. It was still and thick like black oil. This was the heart of the abyss. The small one-man diving bell was lowered over the side. It was a crude spherical cage of iron with thick glass portholes. An air hose and a communications line were my only links to the world above. "The Yetzorg is in the main hold," Thomas said over the crackling comms unit, his voice tense. "The pressure down there, physical and psychic, will be immense. Do not look at the artifact directly, just get as close as you can. Focus on your memories. Give it the light. Give it the beauty. Show it the world it can never touch." The cage hit the water, and the world dissolved into blackness. As I descended, the pressure built, making my ears pop. The water was a swirling soup of shadow and faint moving lights. The hollows, more numerous and indistinct, here in their native element. They pressed against the glass of the porthole, their featureless voids seeming to stare directly into my soul. Whispers flooded the comms, 1,000 voices speaking of failure and rot. You will be one of us, an empty shell, a forgotten footnote. I closed my eyes, focusing on my litany of beauty. The structure of a Bach fugue, the perfect geometry of a snowflake, the curve of a flying buttress at Notre Dame. I recited them like a prayer. The cage jolted to a halt. It had landed on the ship's decaying deck. Through the porthole, I could see the gaping maw of the main hold, a rectangle of absolute darkness that seemed to drink the light from my lamp. The hum was overwhelming now, a physical force that vibrated through my bones. This was it. I took a deep breath and unleashed everything I had. I didn't just remember the library at Oxford, I rebuilt it in my mind, every detail, every book, every mote of dust in the air. I poured all my passion, my love for knowledge, my belief in the transcendent power of human creation, into a single, focused blast of mental energy. I aimed it not at the darkness, but at the ship itself. You are not a tomb, I thought, projecting with all my will. You are a work of art, a vessel of human ingenuity. Remember the forest you came from. Remember the hands that shaped you. Remember the purpose you were given. You are not a prison. You are a cathedral, a monument. For a moment, nothing happened. The whispers grew to a roar. The darkness in the hold seemed to swell, pushing outwards. I felt my consciousness start to fray, the cold despair of the Yurtazorg seeping into me, showing me visions of my own corpse bloating in the deep, my life's work forgotten. Then, something changed. A light began to glow, not from my lamp, but from the wood of the ship itself. Faint lines of golden energy traced the outlines of the deck planks, the ribs of the hull, the curve of the broken mast. The ship was responding. The memory of its own creation was fighting back against the curse of its cargo.
The light grew brighter, a brilliant golden cage forming around the darkness of the hold. The whispers turned to a single deafening shriek of rage and disbelief. The pressure on my mind was immense. I felt a sharp tearing pain, as if something was being ripped from me. The last thing I heard before I blacked out was a sound that should have been impossible in the crushing depths of the sea. The pure, resonant chime of a great iron bell. I awoke on the deck of the Studig, coughing up seawater. Thomas and the fishermen were hauling the diving bell back on board. My head was splitting, and a part of my memory felt blank. I could remember the plan, the descent, but the specific memories I had used as a weapon were gone. I knew I had once loved the architecture of libraries, but I could no longer recall the feeling, the specific joy of it. It was just a smooth, cold void where that passion used to be. It was the price I had paid. Elara was waiting for us at the pier as the sun rose. For the first time, a real, unfiltered dawn was breaking over Kystenvik. The sky was a brilliant canvas of pink and gold. The air was clean and crisp. The houses, while still old and weathered, no longer seemed to be weeping. They stood firm, their lines true. The oppressive weight was gone. I looked at Elara. Is it over? She looked out at the sea, a deep and unreadable expression on her face. You have not destroyed the heart. You have merely changed the nature of its prison. The Sorgen's Dronning is no longer a tomb of sorrow. It is a cathedral of beauty. The gloom is still there, but it is trapped within walls of light, mesmerized by a story it cannot comprehend. So Kystenvik is safe, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. For now, she said, and her words were heavy. You have built a beautiful cage, Doctor. But all cages can be broken, and you have taught the thing in the deep a new word, beauty. And now it will spend an eternity contemplating it, wanting it, learning. I left Kystenvik the next day. The villagers saw me off with a new respect, but also a new distance. I was the man who had faced the gloom and survived, but I was also the one who had taken a piece of their burden and replaced it with a new, unknown one. My life returned to normal, or a semblance of it. My academic career found new life. My paper, a phenomenological study of structural despair in Kystenvik, was lauded as a masterpiece of metaphorical analysis. My colleagues praised my artistic interpretation, never knowing the literal truth of it. But I know. The price of victory was a part of myself. There are gaps in my knowledge, cold spots in my soul where passion used to burn.
Sometimes late at night, when the fog rolls in off the Thames, I feel a faint, familiar hum in my bones.
I smell the scent of salt and ancient rot. I know that the gloom is not gone, it is merely quiet, trapped in its sunken cathedral of light. And I know that it is learning from the memories I gave it. It is studying the beauty, the logic, the art, and I live in constant quiet terror of the day it finally understands them. For what new and far more terrible form of sorrow will be born from the corruption of perfect beauty? The weeping may have stopped in Kystenvik, but I fear the real horror is only just beginning.
Thanks for watching to the end. We've got plenty more exciting videos coming your way, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out.